Hi, all. Well, it was supposed to be opening day today for baseball and my beloved Detroit Tigers, but unfortunately, the bad news is opening day was canceled. The good news is my Tigers can probably go for the next month without losing a ball game, something I would not have expected. Anyway, a little bit more about inflation today. Inflation is just the percentage change in prices. That's all inflation means. So we're going to use annual inflation. What that means is what is the change in prices from one year to the next? It's the change in a price index, overall prices, not just one price. So once again, we use the same formula for percentage change. We've been using it all along. It's the new price index minus the old, new minus old, divided by old. So, in an earlier video, I think it was video 1 for this chapter, we calculated the price index for 3 different years. We were using a group of goods students might decide to consume. And what we said was 2018 was at 100, 2019 110, 2020 116.7. I hope you recall. What does it mean when the price index is 100? The answer is that's the base year. So let's apply this and we say annual inflation. Let's calculate the inflation rate for 2019. In other words, the whole basket of goods. Remember, we saw some had gone up in price like pizza, some had stayed the same like a notebook, and some had actually gone down in price. For example, we have the pop or the soda if you're from the East Coast. We take the price index in the second year, in the newer year. We subtract the price index in the previous year. You might want to make sure you write this down, the price index in the previous year. And we divide that by the price index in the previous year. So what you can see is inflation is 110 minus 100 divided by 100, which is 10%. The inflation rate for 2019 was 10%. So I hope you have some paper and a calculator. Let's say we want to look at the inflation rate for 2020. What would the inflation rate be in 2020? Once again, new minus old, and it's annual. Very important, annual, from the previous year, not from the base year. We're saying what happened from one year to the next. So see if you can calculate the inflation rate for 2020. You can stop the video if you want and calculate it and see how your answer compares. So hopefully you got 6.1%. A lot of students will use 116.7 minus 100 over 100. No, that's not annual. That would be from 2 years ago. We don't use the base year here unless it's 1 year after the base year. Things are hopping around a bit. Sorry about that. And we see that the inflation rate for 2020 was 6.1%. Okay. Now, let's look at the actual current inflation rate. You know, one thing I always try and tell you what's going on the other side of the windows in that place called the real world. By the way, today in Ohio, as I speak on Thursday, the weather is beautiful, and I'm even going to sneak out for a bike ride later this afternoon. 1 year ago, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, stood at 252.8. Today, the most recent one we have, March data has not yet come out, is 258.7. The new price index minus the old price index over the old. And what we see is the current inflation rate, oh come on, is 2.3%. The change, new minus old, over the old. 2.3%. So, as I say, I always like to, show you what's going on in the real world. Sorry, I cut off part of this. I'm not that good yet at making videos. Please forgive me. But this is inflation going back to about 1960. Once again, gray areas are recession. What you can see is, thanks to OPEC, we had two spikes in inflation in 73 and in 79, 80. OPEC dramatically raised prices. Spending in the war in Vietnam caused inflation right around here. But since that time, what you can see is, despite a little tick upwards in the late 1980s, inflation has gone down, and today it's on the order of about 2%. In other words, inflation is really rather mild compared to the past. Well, another thing that we sometimes want to know is what is, if we look at something in the past, how much is that worth in today's dollars? Let me work through an example here. I did some looking online, and that period right around the base year, 1983, Congress could not agree on a single year, so they used the average of 82 to 84. But the price of gasoline in 1983 was $1.24. But overall prices have risen since then. $1.24 in 1983, what's that worth in today's dollars? That's a good question. In other words, if we account for inflation, $1.24 then is worth how much today? Well, here's a formula for doing it. You might want to write this down. This is important. Hint, you sometimes will see this on past exams. Obviously, you guys are pretty smart. And given the fact that you're pretty smart, you know how to look up and find formulas. But the key, the way to doing well on the exams, is to make sure that you understand when to use the formulas. I like to tell the old joke about the plumber. Somebody calls him and says there's a knocking in their pipes. The plumber shows up, takes out his wrench, bangs on the pipes, and they stop knocking. He tells the guy that'll be $100. The guy says, $100, I want an itemized bill. And the plumber says, okay. And he says, okay, for knocking on the pipe, $2. For knowing where to knock, $98. Obviously, you can do math. But the question is, do you know where to put things in? So if you want to know something in the past, like that $1.24, how much is that worth in today's dollars? So we take that price way back when, we multiply that by the consumer price index today and divide it by the consumer price index then. In other words, if prices have doubled, then $1.24 in 1983 would be equivalent to twice that amount, $2.48 today. So let's work through that. Let's use the actual examples. And what we can see here is if the price was $1.24, and we'll say 83 is about when we had the base year, so we'll say the price index in 83 was 100. Here is the current consumer price index. Prices have gone up by more than 2.5 times. So $1.24 then, it would be a little more than twice as great in today's terms. In other words, the current price index divided by the consumer price index back then. So that's equal to $3.20. If you account for overall price inflation, by this I mean the fact that prices have gone up overall, we see gasoline was a little bit cheaper than it was in 1983, if you correct for overall inflation. But given the recent changes that we've seen, Saudi Arabia doesn't like what Russia is doing. Russia won't cooperate with the cartel, so Saudi Arabia has flooded the market. Plus the demand for gasoline is down given the current coronavirus scare. Gasoline prices are lower than I've seen in decades. I drove by the other day, it was $1.63 for gas. Wow. So gas is a lot cheaper if we correct for inflation than it was in the past. Okay, here's a problem for you. I looked up and I saw that in 2010, the average person who was working full-time in the United States was making $748. If the consumer price index, I looked this up, was 217.6 then in 2010, and it's currently 257.8, what is 2010 weekly earnings in today's dollars? Now, 2 points. One, why would we want to know this? The answer as to why we would want to know this is, it tells us, corrected for inflation, are people better off than they were in the past? That's really worth knowing. Secondly, this is a great practice problem. Stop the video. Get your paper and pencil and see if you can calculate what is $748 in 2010 worth in today's dollars. Okay, here we go. The answer is $886. What's the important point here? Actually, the current weekly earnings are $936. So the average worker is about $50 better off. The average worker is, give or take, about 6% better off in terms of their weekly earnings compared to 2010. Not a big improvement, but it's still better than nothing. Okay, now, there's a couple of videos that you might want to watch from the Marginal Revolution University. They talk about inflation in different places. The inflation rate in Venezuela right now is about 10,000%. Wow. And given the fact that that's the case, what you can see is that sometimes people say, oh, what should I do with all my money? Well, the answer is very simple. Why don't I use it to decorate trees? Not worth much anyway. You'll notice that in the Marginal Revolution University, they talk about what's going on in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe had really bad inflation. Actually, if you watch that other video, they'll even give you some reasons why inflation was so high in Zimbabwe. But here's the important point. Can you imagine buying one beer and having to spend this much money? Oh, by the way, don't feel too sorry for the gentleman. That's equivalent to about $2 in American money. So inflation can really be disruptive. Finally, one last thing, as you watch that other video, they use a slightly different notation, but it's the same exact formula. As you're watching that other video, you'll notice that they talk about inflation being the price in the second year minus the first, in other words, the change over the first. Same thing we've been doing, the change over the original value. P2 is what I call the new price. P1 is what I call the old price. It's just the same formula with different notation. One of the things after watching this video or some of the other videos, I really haven't gotten much feedback. If there's something I can do better, or maybe you just like the videos, whatever, drop me an email and let me know. And if you want to talk about anything, drop me an email. We can correspond by email. We can correspond by Skype, Google Hangouts, phone, whatever you want. I'll be glad to correspond with people. If you have any issues in terms of understanding stuff, the course, what's going on, glad to work with you. Take care. Stay well.